Welcome to the Columbus Metropolitan Club. This week, CMC and American Electric Power present Fueling Ohio's Future series installment, Battery Technology Powers the Future, in partnership with OSU's Office of Energy and the Environment and Tech Columbus. I'd like to thank our sponsors this morning. Today we have a great group of speakers who each bring high technical and practical knowledge of both energy systems and business and how batteries play an integral role in the mix. Please welcome John Bair, CEO of KAir Energy Systems, LLC, Ram Sastry, Vice President, Infrastructure and Business Continuity at AEP, Amul D. Tevar, OSU Battelle Joint Appointee, and our host and moderator, the Interim Director of OSU's Office of Energy and the Environment, Kate Bartter. Kate, the podium is yours. Please help me welcome all of our speakers.
Thanks, Kermit. It's really great to be here today to talk about energy storage and batteries. Now, my guess is that most of you think in terms of things like AA, single A, C batteries, all the batteries that are powering all of our gadgets, or maybe you think about the day last winter during the polar vortex when your car died, when your car wouldn't start because your battery died. What you might not all know is that the future of our entire energy system is critically tied to improving how we store energy. I don't think I'm exaggerating when I say improved energy storage is viewed as really the holy grail to renewable energy. It may sound cliche, but the fact is that the wind doesn't always blow, or it blows at the wrong time, and the sun doesn't always shine. So making electricity from renewable sources such as wind and solar is really dependent on improving our ability to store that energy for when we need it. And I'm pretty sure that whoever invents the real breakthrough technology in this area is going to make a lot of money. I'd probably use a technical term like $1 bazillion. Now, batteries are also a big deal for transportation. If electric vehicles are ever going to really displace cars run on gasoline, it's going to have to be really easy and cheap to use batteries. I'm sure you've all heard about the giant battery plant that Tesla is opening in Nebraska. This was really portrayed as one of the biggest economic development deals that states had competed for in a while, and I think that in alone tells you that batteries are really big business. Now, energy storage doesn't just matter if we want more renewable energy or want to drive electric vehicles. It matters for all kinds of energy. Those of you who were living in Columbus in 2008 undoubtedly remember when the power was out for well over a week in some places, myself included. Now, I will admit that I kind of liked the outage for the first 2 days. Instead of being glued to the TV and to the computer, my family was actually sitting outside and talking to each other. Now, of course, it didn't hurt that it was a day like today. It was beautiful autumn weather. We didn't really need heat. We didn't need air conditioning. But honestly, by Day 7, the situation had disintegrated. I had thrown out hundreds of dollars worth of food. My house was filthy. I remember thinking, why is my house so dirty without electricity? And my husband and I had kind of run out of things to talk about. So we were ready to come back into the modern era. So the fact is that energy storage and battery systems are all part of the solution to making the electricity grid smarter and reliable in the future so that when the power goes out in one spot, the entire neighborhood or really the entire region doesn't go out as well. Now, fortunately, there are a lot of really smart people working on these challenges, and I consider myself quite lucky to have the privilege to work with so many great minds at Ohio State on this every day. Now, I'd be remiss if I didn't give a shout out to our Dean of Engineering, Dave Williams, who's sitting in the audience. He's one of those great leaders at Ohio State working on this. And if those of you don't know, Ohio State, under the leadership of Giorgio Rizzoni, who's been a speaker here, just set another world record for the fastest electric vehicle on Earth. So we think we have a lot of street cred in this issue. But now on to our panel. We are fortunate to have 3 different people who have worked on this issue from some very different perspectives. And I want to start today's discussion, and that's what we indeed hope to have, is a discussion by asking Amul Tevar, who is the very first joint Ohio State Battelle hire, to kind of a question about the global challenge of battery technology. Now, Dr. Tevar is actually pretty new on the job. 4 weeks, is that right?
Yep.
So we got to get him broken in early for this.
And my boss is right here, so I have to be really careful.
And he had the great experience of being a fellow at the Advanced Research Project Agency for Energy, known as ARPA-E in DC, where he got to see all kinds of all the latest and greatest ideas in this space, from industry, from academia, and he's probably seen more proposals for how to improve battery technology than anybody in this room, I might venture to guess. So Amul, can you kind of frame the big picture for us about energy storage and improved technology? Maybe give us some insight as to what the federal government is thinking, where they're putting their dollars, that sort of thing, to get us going.
Sure. I think the first thing that comes to mind with batteries is there's creating the actual cell and the new technology, and you might hear some new nanotechnology or some way of basically taking energy from one side, using it, and then recharging it and repeating it. And then there's the rest of it, which is the system build. So the battery is one part of a larger system. So just having the battery alone doesn't make you the winner, doesn't make you the lone player. And so that's where the international perspective, I think, really comes in. I think the United States has an incredible amount of intellectual capital and lead in creating really revolutionary ways of thinking about batteries. And what's, I think, unique to the Ohio area, and part of the reason I'm here and not California, is that there's also the potential for manufacturing, where right now a lot of that manufacturing expertise lies in Asia. And that's just because it takes a long time and a real dedication to getting something done at a system level, and I'm sure John will talk much more about this, that beyond just inventing that battery. But to give one frame of reference, everyone here probably owns a lead-acid battery. That was invented in 1859. 1859, everyone here owns something. Now, if you go back, there's not many other things that you own besides a spoon and a fork that would also be recognized in 1859. And so that's one kind of like, wow, the lead-acid battery is an extremely impressive chemistry. Another thing, that it's really hard to make a battery. And it's really hard to make a battery that can perform and last the way that we want it to. It's a lead-acid battery, probably, even with the invention of lithium-ion, you might have remembered the nickel, like the nickel metal hydride, and you have the big VCR-type cameras that you're carrying on your shoulder. And now you can have that same kind of battery in a small packet. But the lead-acid battery still holds about half the global market. And it is a global competition, whether or not it's recognized that there is a lot of people across the world trying to win the game, trying to get at the $10, $15 billion market, also because the markets that will enable for whoever kind of comes ahead. And it's not just having the ability to create new ideas, but actually get them out in the market. That's really the key. And
how much has the federal government invested, would you say, in the past 5 years in improving battery technology?
I think in the past 5, I would say hundreds of millions, and that's building on technologies that are already out there, even because it's such an important issue. Whoever can really come out ahead right now, because it's the wild, wild west right now, no one's really come out with a brand new system that's been able to take over a significant chunk of the market yet.
Okay, thanks. Well, let me ask Ram Sastry, who is thinking about this issue in terms of working for a company that provides power to 5 million customers in 11 states, if my AEP information is correct here. Where does this fit into your world at a large investor-owned utility and someone who's providing providing power for lots and lots of people, including those of us who lost power from time to time? Not that we're bitter or anything. So give us your perspective from that angle.
So Kate, thank you for the question, and I know you've lost power, and I'm glad you've got it back. And while we were having lunch, Kate said she lives very close to Joe Hamrock, who used to be the president and chief operating officer of AEP Ohio during that point. But she finally got her power back. And how does an investor-owned utility, a provider of energy, look at battery energy storage systems? And I'll use the broader context here. And I'll talk about three different areas, and I'll use a little bit of a technical term, but I'll describe it. So the first one, which Kate articulated so well, was renewable integration. The sun really doesn't shine a lot in Ohio, and it doesn't shine anywhere all the time. The wind doesn't blow when you need the power. If renewables are really going to make an inroad into the energy infrastructure of the country, and this country is blessed with vast amounts of renewable energy, but the sun is in the southwest, in the desert areas of the southwest. The winds are in the North Dakota, South Dakota, where there's not really that many people, but there's a lot of renewable resources. If we could take that renewable energy and integrate it with energy storage systems, we would be able to get what a utility company would call dispatchable energy, which is dispatchable energy is really important because we need to be able to provide the energy to our customers when they want it, not when it's available. So whenever you flip a switch on, someone somewhere is turning on more production so that power flows to you. And it's happening real time all the time. And that's the broad grid that balances all that. So if you have solar panels on your house now, you're really relying on that broader grid to do that balancing. And without cost-effective energy storage systems, large-scale deployment of renewables is not going to happen. And that's really, like Kate said, it is the holy grail. And we have a lot of wind and solar that we do in the utility side of the house, utility-scale solar and utility-scale wind, but we have to back it up with fossil fuel generation or nuclear generation to be dispatchable. So it's there, but it's not as useful as the energy that you can dispatch. So that's one area. The second area is capacity. And again, that's a technical term, but we have to, if the economy grows and more people move out of their parents' houses and build their own houses, let's go into that, and start using more power, which we all hope for, and many people choose to buy a Tesla or an electric vehicle, all that is new load. Again, the utility, we have an obligation to serve our customers. We have to build new generating plants to support that load. And every utility has to provide peak load. That means the load the amount of energy that's required on the hottest day in the hottest month in August. Now, this was a strange August, but in a normal August, that hottest day. So think about it. The rest of the year, you don't need all that capacity, but we have to build it to be available so that the last air conditioner on that day, at 2 in the afternoon on that hot day, when that person puts it on, the capacity, the ability to provide that customer with power has to exist. So it's very expensive. Everyone pays for that, and you're paying for a very so if you look at economic theory, you want your capacity as used as maximally as possible. Here you have a system that's not used as maximally as possible. Battery energy storage systems could be used to provide that peaking capability. And the last place, which goes to Kate's loss of power, is energy. If we had more battery systems or energy storage systems distributed along our grid, along the electrical grid, we would have a more resilient grid. If you lost power, it'll be like a whole house UPS. So right now, you have computer systems that have uninterrupted power supplies, a little battery system that helps them stay up till the power comes back. But we actually piloted this. We didn't deploy it because we had some project constraints, but we piloted what we call community energy storage, which is taking a big, large battery, and we've done lots of large batteries in different areas near our substations, and dividing it into smaller batteries and putting it in the backyards of our customers. It looks like a little green box, just like that little green box that houses the transformer, connects to 4 or 5 houses, and if the power goes off, it instantly senses it and provides backup power to that customer. And when it's not doing the backup power, we can, using communications and computing technology, we can tell all these batteries to act like one big battery and provide that peak capacity on that circuit if we need to. So those are the 3 areas we're looking at. And they work in all those 3 areas. The barrier today is cost. It's coming down, but it hasn't come down to where it makes economical sense to do a large-scale deployment.
I want to switch. I've got some questions, but I'll come back to you, Ram, and switch to John Bair a little bit. Now, John is an engineer and an entrepreneur. He's done some interesting work, mostly in the IT field, and now he is bravely charging forward to take some pretty innovative chemistry that has led to a new battery, which I'd like him to tell everyone about, and trying to bring it out into the real world, into the marketplace. So, John, can you maybe talk a little bit about what KAir Battery is and what you see are the real challenges to take in an idea by a great professor in a laboratory at Ohio State and turn it into a marketable business that can help solve this problem?
Okay. So one of the things about batteries, Ram, you mentioned it, cost. Today, from a cost standpoint, we could implement the grid, the distributed grid. We could have 1 megawatt CESs sitting in every neighborhood. We could, but the cost would be immense, right? Now, on the lead acid battery comment, it's interesting that there's a weighting going on here between cost, efficiency, density, and the environment, right? Because everything we do, there's about $400 million or $1 billion lost in just the power, distribution, supply, demand generation going on. And then there's the ecology side of it, where all this stuff has to be disposed of. And then there's the efficiencies of the renewables, where it's not always on. So there's a balancing act. It's about a $400 billion issue. So the KAir Battery, when Dr. Wu in Ohio State Labs, his lab, discovered it, he discovered a way to take potassium and turn it into a potassium superoxide. So on one side, you have an anode, and you have an electrode, and you have a cathode. It's your standard battery, right? So what happens is you discharge your battery, the potassium ions go to the other side of the battery to meet the oxygen and creates potassium superoxide, which releases an electron, and now you have a battery. To charge it, it actually takes the oxygen, takes it back out of the battery, and combines the two on the anode side. And that recharge cycle is very, very, very important. To make your systems work, you probably need about 4,000 recharge cycles, which would be about a 10-year use on those energy storage. So if you think about going back to the cost, the cost that was discovered using a potassium air battery, okay, remember, it's air, so it's pretty free over here. Potassium is 22% of the battery. Potassium makes up is the 7th most abundant element on Earth, okay? So if you think about lithium-ion batteries or even lead-acid batteries, the cost of those batteries is about $500 to $800 per kilowatt hour. The potassium battery, even in low volumes right now, is about $89 per kilowatt hour. So you have a factor of 6 difference in this technology. So what we're working on currently at KAir Energy Systems, and I say systems because, to your point, it's not just the battery, it's the entire system. It's the engineering to make the entire grid work and pull it all together and manage that battery in a large scale. Is the fact that cost price point makes this all doable at $89 per kilowatt hour. Also, the environmental impact of it is it's potassium. It could be turned into a fertilizer at the end of its life.
And building on that a little bit, Dr. Tevar is not just an engineer, he's also an epidemiologist. So can you comment a little bit about what are the environmental issues with batteries, and how would technology like KAir move in and help solve what might be some of the environmental challenges? I know that I don't really want to throw batteries in the trash. I try not to throw. I hope all of you don't throw your batteries in the trash at home. But there are some issues with some environmental impacts with all kinds of energy production, and this is one of them. Can you speak to that a little bit, Amul?
Sure. I think with the lead-acid battery, you've heard like lead in your paints. You want to be careful that you can have as little exposure to that as possible. And so there, it's a question of parts per billion or parts per million of how much lead you can have a safe exposure to. But I think where something like this technology is really interesting is that you can't think of it just within a domestic context. Domestic recycling, and in developed countries, their recycling for lead acid is, I think, in the greater 90%. So you're not really having a big issue there. The problem is if this is the global battery, You go into places like, in Africa or, rural India, you're not going to have that recycling there. And that's where I think the greater public health issue is, on one side, there's a making of it, but the disposal and what happens at the end of life. And so that's, I think the main issue, especially with lead acid batteries, if you don't have a safe way of disposing of it in a developing country, especially where there's a humongous demand, how then can you make a system that it's not an issue, where you can still have the same kind of performance or power and not have to worry about where it goes after it's done?
So there's not, I mean, what do you, I can't help but draw an analogy between, in lighting with CFCs. Everybody trumpeted CFCs as, and certainly we banned incandescent light bulbs, but there are mercury issues, there are toxic issues with disposal. I mean, if we move toward greater use of batteries and storage, are we creating some kind of risk of public backlash for toxics in batteries, or just something, or and any one of you could comment on this, do you worry about that as part of the business plan at all, or?
I think it's actually critical. I think the recycling in the U.S. needs to be really, especially the electronics and the batteries, and in general, needs to be beefed up. Europe has it together, for the recycling. You think about a few years back when we went through RoHS, if anybody's heard of that restriction of hazardous substances, we made sure there was no more lead in computers, which made it really hard to make computers with no lead on solder. But we continue to throw all the batteries from cars and other things like that into the landfills, right? I think if you don't have a balanced approach, thinking about your environment and thinking about business, you're going to have a backlash. So it really, from a design standpoint and engineering standpoint, all that has to be figured out up front before you execute on a strategy. And our strategy is to make sure we cover all the constituents, the environment, the people, the society as a whole.
And Ron, do you have any thoughts about the environmental issues associated with batteries and energy systems from a utility standpoint, or?
So I would differentiate between consumer applications and industrial applications, and there would be regulations and rules that we deal with lots and lots of hazardous chemicals today, and we would follow the rules and the protocols and make sure that there isn't any damage to the environment. As a steward of the environment, we continually do that, and we would continue to do that. It is, though, I do agree with the other panelists, if energy storage systems become ubiquitous, that every house has one, and then consumers, I don't know if some consumers are very good at it and some consumers are not. They might throw it into landfills, and some of these chemicals can be very toxic and can have heavy metals and have lots of degradation to the environment. So it definitely is something to keep in mind, and it just depends on which side the adoption occurs.
Okay. I want to go back to KAir Battery, and John, and get you to talk a little bit about what's the opportunity space for Central Ohio for jobs and manufacturing if this technology really develops and gets to the position for full-scale commercial implementation. Could this be a big job creation?
Yeah. Oh, absolutely.
For this state?
I believe so. Our intent is to develop and deploy from the state of Ohio. So we have been talking to Jobs Ohio. In my last company, we did work with Jobs Ohio to bring in a number of jobs and bring new facilities in. And one of those facilities is located down in Rickenbacker, and it's almost ready to go. It's a 600,000 square foot facility that can handle this type of manufacturing for us. It has a 200,000 square foot anti-static lab. It's got rooms that are set up for handling hazardous chemicals and processes. So yes, there's a lot of capabilities in Ohio to do this type of manufacturing. We're going to utilize them, and working with Jobs Ohio, we're bringing other resources we didn't know that were out there, other technologies like when they make lithium or they make fuel cells. The fuel cell process is very similar to the KAir Battery in the fact that it has to breathe and it can be done in sheets. So there's other facilities that could be retrofitted to actually produce these batteries in Ohio. So we're a team with Jobs Ohio. I think it's going to be a really good partnership to develop those jobs here.
Do you have a sense of how long before you see batteries manufactured in Ohio? I know I might be putting you on the spot a little bit.
I know the prototypes will be done by the end of the year in a production type scale. Will it have all the testing, the regulatories, No, that takes time. And to get that done, you got to do it right. So that could be a year, 2-year process to make sure that it's deployed. But the fact of the matter is that since we're at already $89 per kilowatt hour and the competition's about 500 to 800, and the DOE's not expecting or not mandating or not projecting that the cost of a kilowatt hour batteries will be down to 150 by 2012 or 2022, I think is correct. We have a few years to do it right. So we're going to do it right.
Amul, when you were at ARPA-E looking at people, I mean, coming in with new ideas, is there anything you saw that you thought might really piqued the interest in DOE, where you thought, man, this group out of Ohio or MIT or Stanford or Michigan or Purdue, I'm just naming some of the great engineering schools, that you thought might be the innovation that you hope to see? Or could you tell us about anything that was just a super crazy idea but might just work, which is always interesting?
There was one idea that was just phenomenal, but I cannot tell anyone about it.
You'll all have to sign a non-disclosure agreement.
So I think I think the one thing that's interesting is that you would expect that, oh, here's the name brand and here's the idea. No one's got a monopoly on good ideas. No one. There's good ideas everywhere. The question is who can execute and who has the ability to put together teams and the mentality to go for it. So I think it's in terms of technology, I'm getting far off the original topic. The question, yes, there's plenty of great things out there. The question is who's going to execute, who's going to put together the right environment to allow, I think, maybe even embrace failure. I think failure in this field is a down payment for success. Like, you're going to have people that can punch in the face and, like Rocky Balboa, go back up and, get punched in the face. And eventually, they'll get the knockout. But you have to be able to go back in again and again to get something that actually works.
I think we were talking earlier, too, about, you mentioned team a number of times. It's really the team, right? You need a team of scientists, engineers, professionals, business people that can pull together. And I think that Columbus, Ohio, and Ohio in general has that type of mentality to make this happen. Absolutely. And we'll take a few shots, I'm sure. So
You'll get your boxing gloves out.
Yeah.
So what is it about Ohio? You alluded to this, Amul. You've been in Ohio for 4 weeks, I believe. Is that correct? Or you, John, that you could probably pick up and go elsewhere at this point in your life. What is it about the state, the city, that makes you want to do business here?
Yeah. So when I graduated from Ohio State and started the first business, I knew Ohio with its logistics and its engineering facilities and the educated workforce that it has here. It was hands down a great place to be. But I could say that true in California and other locations. But the work ethic in the Midwest, and matter of fact, we had no customers, believe it or not, for 15 years in Ohio. Our customers were everywhere else. They were on the West Coast, they were in Europe, they were in the East Coast. It was a virtual company, but it was 200 and some thousand square feet of virtual company doing engineering, design, and work. But the work ethic, the wages that are paid, just the entire, when you do the analysis, Ohio is a great place to set up a business and run it. From a cost, economics, the wages, living standards, it's everything, logistics. We're 85% right here from Columbus, Ohio, out of Rickenbacker, of 85% of the population of the United States within a truck ride, one truck ride. That's huge. And then the international presence.
Do you want to add anything to that? You hear he said it all? Okay.
I agree.
So is there any real economics are a huge issue, taking technologies and making this, building things to scale more efficiently, more cheaply, but is there any fundamental science that still needs to be done to make batteries and energy storage systems work to their maximum potential?
I would say absolutely. I think, whether or not you're in the basic science and think about application or you're developing something, there's always going to be a point where you run against some issue They need to be able to go backwards and find a new material, a new process, or something, some widget that's very close to basic science to be able to get that thing out the door. So absolutely, I think you can't, especially in this field where it's not a virtual field, you are making something. And once your hands are touching something and not, moving something virtually, it does require you at some point where you're going to run into the body of knowledge that you don't have, and you have to address that.
And certifications and regulatories all have to be considered. You deal with a lot of regulatories. But, I mean, every product goes through a whole regulatory regimen of testing and certifications for safety.
And just to build on John's point, I know you lost power, but the grid is very, very reliable. I mean, I have been in my house for like 18 years, and I've lost power maybe 3 times. In fact, I called a guy to give me a quote on a backup generator. It was $10,000. I said, that's not worth it for me. Now, obviously, Kate's experience is different. But my point is that the grid is very, very reliable, and it's built of very, very reliable parts. So we talk to a lot of battery vendors. We welcome new technologies. And the battery works in an idealized lab environment, but it's not hardened for the environment of the grid, which is outside, in the hot sun, in the freezing cold, with dust. And in fact, some of the problems we've had with new technologies is just making them resilient and robust and reliable enough to deploy. So it's great to go from science to pilot to prototype to manufacturing, but to be on the grid, which is made of millions and millions of little devices and widgets, they have to be very, very reliable, because we don't just look at the first cost of it, we look at the lifetime cost of it. And it might be cheap to start off with, and actually John's numbers are outstanding. If achieved, they are really, truly disruptive to the energy storage area. But we look at, do we have to send someone every 3 months to go and fix it or twiddle with it or check it? That makes it much more expensive for us. We want to put it in the field, forget it, and make sure it works for 20 years without anyone touching it, because that lowers the cost of power to everyone, all our customers.
Can I make a guess? Yeah. You probably have maintenance issues with simple things like fan, cooling, pumps.
Seals,
just
right.
the engineering done around it because it's too complex to maintain the system, right?
That's right.
That's what we're trying to eliminate in our
That's
system.
right. The oddest thing, John, is we don't have problems with the battery part. We have it with everything that surrounds the battery, which is all old stuff, but it's not integrated well.
I was going to add one thing about, we're talking about the grid storage. So everyone here has a cell phone they love, and inside that cell phone is a battery they probably hate, because it's always going to go out the wrong time. Now imagine if you're trying to get a battery that's orders of magnitude larger than that, and this is your company. How are you going to know that this battery is going to get you that 10 or 20 years when it was invented 5 years ago? So if you have this much frustration and irritation with your cell phone, imagine now scaling that up to a tremendous size. And that's kind of a way I think of it is like the grid is like the biggest kitchen in the world that has no pantry. There's nothing. It's just what you have there. It's just what's actively burning right now. There's no way of storing anything yet because it's just so hard.
Well, energy travels about the speed of light, which is 186,000 miles per second, right? So it goes around the Earth in 1.34 seconds. So imagine that, you turn the lights on, it's there. If it stops, those lights are off. So to your point about the cell phones, so remember, battery storage goes in more than just electrical storage, stationary storage. It's cars, vehicles, appliances. I mean, all the small stuff you're talking about, cell phones, we'll probably just end up never charging them again because they'll charge from all the RF floating around. The fact is, the fact of the matter is batteries extend a whole way across every industry that we count on and survive in today.
Yeah, great point. Well, I think we're probably at the point where we want to engage all of you a little bit, and it is CMC's tradition to take audience questions. I'm going to ask any of you who want to come up and ask one of our great panelists a question to go to the microphone, state your name, ask your question, and we do want to thank you all in advance for avoiding editorial comments.
Hi, I'm Bill Lafayette. I'm a CMC trustee and an economist, and not an engineer, which may explain the question I'm about to ask. A while back, everybody seemed to be talking about geothermal energy, and I don't hear much about that anymore. Is that just because I haven't been listening, or is there a problem?
No, geothermal energy, or the use of geothermal energy is a real science, and it really works. But geothermal energy is really to get the delta to save energy between the temperature of the water down in ground and the temperature up here, so you don't have to cool or heat it as much. So all you're doing is really closing a gap by using the energy of the earth, right? OSU has a huge geothermal power plant right underneath the Ohio Union, I think, in the front. It's very viable.
Yeah, we're providing about a third of our heating and cooling for our south dorms on campus with a 560 some wells dug in the south oval of OSU. The former president used to say we were fracking on the oval, which was really not true, but we were digging a geothermal well field, which is a complicated, which is working pretty well. It's not, I don't think all the kinks of it are out yet, but we have a couple of different geothermal systems at Ohio State as we speak.
And I'll add one reason why I think you haven't heard as much about geothermal, because of natural gas.
Yeah.
So there's a physical thing that's happened, is that we basically discovered a bank vault underneath the United States, and then turns out everyone else is discovering their bank vaults too. We can't get in there yet, we don't have the code, but it's a psychological shift where now technically we have more power, and we can be a net energy exporter if we could just get to it and get that working. So I think that's another reason why that, across all the fields, a big, the change where we were always the ones looking outside for energy. Now we have this potential to do it all internally.
Hi, I'm Laura Kaprowski with the Mid-Ohio Regional Planning Commission. My question is, this week there's a lot of conversations, international conversations in New York City about climate change, and I'm just wondering, is there any connection what we're talking about today with batteries and what's going on in the conversations they're having?
Well, and I would say absolutely, but I'll let one of our speakers address that.
I mean, if you think about it, if you had batteries in the microgrid, and you didn't have to turn up your generators to hit the peak times or the lows. Your lows are coming this winter, by the way, I think. So you would not be burning as much coal or fuels to actually produce that power. And then the renewables would become more useful, right? I mean, solar shines in the day. Well, not everybody's home during the day. They're home at night. Well, wind blows at night, but it doesn't always blow. So if you can save all that energy, and we haven't even talked about things like turbines on rivers or anything like that, wherever you can collect the power, if you could collect it all day long while it's renewable, you would absolutely reduce the amount of fossil fuels you had. I mean, you agree? I mean,
No, John, you're absolutely right. It's that renewable energy integration. So the United States has, like Amul was saying, a lot of natural gas in the earth underneath us, but it has huge amounts of renewable energy. But they're not where people live, and they're not close to where there's lots of electrical wires that can carry it to where people live. So if you could store it and then use it later when people need it, or move it to where people need, you won't burn fossil fuels. And fossil fuel burning is what creates carbon dioxide, but renewables is zero carbon, really.
I think it's part of the story that people are leaving out. Why don't we just have more wind, more solar? Because it's a whole system-wide question. We have to build an energy system for the future that includes storage and batteries to really maximize a cleaner energy future.
So I'm David Hanselman at Ohio State University in the School of Environment and Natural Resources. I'd like to ask about whether we've heard a lot of wonderful things about the capabilities for these enterprises in Ohio, Central Ohio. But still, is there a weak link you could focus on? Is it access to capital, coordination of the existing enterprises here in Central Ohio, and still protecting the investment in intellectual capital that has been made and will be made, or marketing Central Ohio's capabilities to the broader United States so people recognize and want to come here or invest here? So what could state and community and university leaders do to help go from where we are now to achieving a higher result?
I think there's the people at Jobs Ohio, Tech Columbus, the Ohio State University are doing a lot of really good things to bring business, to drive enterprise in the state of Ohio. But what you're not going to change is the Midwest thinking on investments. We were talking about this earlier. Midwesterners are conservative, right? In California and Silicon Valley, where you were for quite a while, it's common to have 2 or 3 businesses that fail. You get up and you learn from it and you move on. Midwesterners are very conservative with investments. So access to capital, it's there, but you better really have your strategic plan, your strategy, everything thought out, okay? Because if you're going in with just half-baked and thinking that this is going to be the greatest thing in the world, and you don't have everything, your ducks in a row, your strategy, your execution plan, you're not going to get funding. And then it's also gotten to the point where getting capital, unless you're in a revenue position, where you're actually running a business and you're in revenue and you're out of the research mode, it's harder to get capital now because there's been too many guys that have failed along the way. So I think it's changing in Ohio. I think people are starting to figure out, we need to make more investments, and the entrepreneurs are going to take risks. We need to take more risks.
Can I jump in and build on that question, John? And, when you think about government support, the federal government has not invested in research for energy like it has in healthcare or other areas. In fact, I'll quote it wrong, I was part of a study that was done by the Brookings Institution a couple years ago to really make the case that we need a much larger investment in R&D from the federal government if we're really going to make this systematic change in our energy system. I'm curious as to how important any of you think the federal government investment in research is towards this transformation.
I think from the battery side of things, I think 15 years ago when the lithium-ion battery first came out, there was a lot of money that probably 100 and some million of that 200 million you talked about probably went into the investment into making lithium batteries work correctly. When we were at DOE and we went to Washington, when we presented the potassium air solution, we weren't on the roadmap. We weren't on the plan of electrification of the transportation fleet for the ODOT or the Department of Energy's initiatives because it didn't fit the standard roadmap that was laid out. Lithium was on the roadmap because it's been there for so many years. So we have to find places where we're disruptive technology, but there's gaps. And there's smaller investments being made there. And that's what we're trying to find. But we could use a lot more help in that area.
So I'm going to disagree completely because I just came from a funding agency, that's a federal funding agency, and also because I'm a sodium-ion guy, not a lithium-ion guy.
Okay.
So I think that there is a lot of work going on there, and I think it's something where it's a problem you can run into where how do you find the right thing to invest in? But in terms of taking shots on things that are just, maybe not going to be on paper the best, the thing that is obvious market value, that the federal government pretty much stands alone on a lot of battery technologies and a lot of other technologies too that, everything's dumb until it works. The internet, GPS, stealth technology, all these ideas are just ideas until, a lot of them are just federal government investing lots of money for, either a certain application they have in mind or just to run something down to see where it goes and leads into. So I think, it is going to be tough to get the funding, especially I think when you're starting a business, but I think the federal government and a lot of the governments, state governments and investors are there, but it is a little bit harder to get into something really new that is game-changing, but I don't think it's impossible by any means.
I'm not going to comment on the federal government because I think they've done it. But as an electric utility, in all electric utilities, we are regulated mainly by the states that we serve. And the states have the power to put rules in that can either incent the deployment of new technologies or inhibit it. So California is an example where the state Utility Commission, the California Public Utility Commission, has mandated that the utilities in California must deploy 1,300 megawatts of storage on their system. And so the PG&E and Southern California Edison, all the investor-owned utilities in California are buying large amounts of storage systems to deploy on their grid. Likewise, if other states say storage is important for making a more resilient, more robust grid, which it will do, because you can get power and energy from an energy storage system when the main grid is off or down or not available. But it can be done through state regulation. But it's about the regulators getting up to speed with that technology, feeling comfortable with that technology, and willing to take a bit of a risk by saying it must be deployed, because the cost of that gets passed on to all the people who pay for their electricity.
And what's the average per kilowatt price for electricity in California today versus Ohio?
Right, so that's the point. So, and then that's why we see, so I hear the comments about Ohio being great for manufacturing and innovation, but you are blessed with very low retail rates of energy. In California, it's a usage-based structure, so it has slabs depending on how much you use. And at the top slab, as you use a lot of power, it's 55 cents a kilowatt hour. 55 cents a kilowatt hour, I bet each and every one of you will be running around switching everything off in your house that you can, because that's a lot to pay for electricity. And the same thing is true in New York. In New York, they can do a lot of things with disruptive, innovative technology because it's 34 cents a kilowatt hour. Massachusetts, so we see a lot of the new technologies being deployed on the coasts in California and in New York, Massachusetts, because the price of retail electricity is much higher. You have to compete with very low-cost electricity, but maybe one day that cost will go up and the cost of the new technologies will go down, and there'll be a crossover point and we'll deploy more.
Hi, Andy Campbell. Thank you for being with us here today. It's very interesting. If you'll indulge me, I have two totally unrelated questions. A quick one for John. I'm just really curious about what the battery looks like. Does it go like everything from hearing aids up to the massive batteries that Ram might be referring to? And then
Yeah, it could scale. I mean, the manufacturing process could scale very small, as long as you can get oxygen to it, to very large scales. So there's no scaling restrictions.
Okay. Second question for Ram, really. I know you're talking about the stability of the grid, but I know that the CEO of AEP, Nick Akins, was just testifying at Congress that the grid might crash during the next polar vortex. Could you maybe expand a little bit on the
And it's always dangerous for me to comment. My boss, like he said, his boss is here. Nick's my global boss. So what Nick's referring to, and what he said about, so the polar vortex was the really cold spell we had this past winter. And a lot of power plants that AEP and all the other utilities you know in this area are planning to shut down because of environmental rules, actually ran during that polar vortex full tilt to provide power to our customers to heat their homes. And we are in the process, we and all the other utilities are in the process of shutting down old coal-burning power plants, because there are rules that say that either you do a lot of expensive retrofits to those or you shut them down. And we're doing retrofits to some of our coal units, but some of them it doesn't make any economical sense. We're shutting it down. The problem is there's not enough new capacity. So if we have another polar vortex, we might have brownouts or blackouts. Now, I'm not saying that will happen, but that could happen if new generation, all that natural gas isn't put to the test. And in fact, during the polar vortex, natural gas couldn't be piped to the Northeast. So they had gas plants that couldn't get the gas to run. So there's a whole series of infrastructure issues that need to be resolved before we can, and that's what he was referring to. Storage is still a long way from resolving that, because we're talking about hundreds of megawatts here.
Can we get one more question in? This gentleman who came up, this will be our last question, I think, today.
Hello, my name's Alex Lee Chen. I'm from a robotics team, actually, from the Columbus Academy, which is a high school out in Gahanna. My question is, what's the current greatest barrier to entry for these battery technologies? Is it the engineering side? Is it the economics, doing economies of scale? Like, why don't we have this technology out today? What's preventing that from happening right now?
Well, it's cost. I mean, mainly it's cost. The efficiencies of the batteries, meaning that lithium could be 90% efficient, where you put 90% of the energy into the battery and 10% turns into heat, but 90 stays in the battery. Efficiencies are okay. They're not great for the lead acid and other batteries. But bottom line is it's cost to deploy and cost of ownership.
I would say, and add on that, it's the runway before you sell enough units to bring down your costs, and how much is your burn rate per month? How much are you spending just to stay alive, trying to get those customers? And then, how long can you do that before you get adoption, or you have to end up closing shop?
But from the engineering standpoint, I think the engineering is there. Matter of fact, leveraging engineering designs that have been used in the past for certain technologies is very viable.
Great discussion today. I hope you enjoyed today's forum. We encourage you to continue the conversation in the lobby over coffee and cookies. Remember that you can view and share all of our forums on Columbus TV Channel 3, statewide on WOSU through the Ohio Channel, and anytime on CMC's website via YouTube. Once more, thanks to our sponsor, AEP, our partners, the OSU Office of Energy and the Environment, and Tech Columbus, and our speakers, John Bair, Ram Sastry, Amul Tevar, and Kate Bartter. And thanks to all of you for being here. We look forward to seeing you again at a CMC soon.